Thank you all for being here. Professor, I need to start with you because I have read quite a bit of your research and background, and my immediate response was, I need to go outside, I cannot stay in my office anymore, I can't stay in my house, and then I had to tell my husband that we would never cook again. So we're just going to close off the kitchen and pretend that didn't happen. But I think that this awareness that so much of our lives may be infiltrated by contaminants we don't see or are not aware of. Growing awareness there and caution from you.
Yeah, right. So, well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate here. Yeah, and I love the opening panel, but I want to let you in on the dirty secret of outdoor air pollution. And that is that the majority of your exposure to outdoor air pollutants can actually occur indoors. Right? You heard
this is why I have to go outside.
Right. Well, we spend 90% of our time indoors. You heard this. Outdoor air pollution penetrates indoors. And because of how much time we spend inside, it turns out that your daily dose, the amount you inhale and your body absorbs, can actually be greater even for outdoor air pollutants. The majority of your exposure can occur indoors. So a lot of times we talk about outdoor air pollution and all the great epidemiological studies linking air pollution and mortality and asthma. Well, the dirty secret is that a lot of that exposure actually happens inside.
And it is maybe damaging to us in ways that we're not quite aware of. You've done some studies in cognition in the workplace and how air affects that.
Yeah, right. We did some work looking at how the indoor environment impacts our ability to think and process information and think about productivity in the indoor environment. And we did this neat study. We enrolled people to come into a controlled environment, and without them knowing, we changed the air they were breathing each day. And then we administered a cognitive function test at the end of the day. And we see that even with minor improvements to the indoor environment, we saw a doubling of cognitive function scores when we increased ventilation rates and lowered the amount of chemicals, specifically VOCs or volatile organic compounds. We see these dramatic improvements in cognitive function scores of people in these spaces. And it fits the body of evidence, 30 years of the science about the indoor environment showing that even minor improvements to indoor environmental health can lead to dramatic impacts on health. And you're right, in ways that we don't always see.
Yeah, and in ways that even as we try to address, I mean, when we, for example, consider the future of built environments, or what I was talking with Dr. Julie about just a moment ago, the notion of retrofitting in a city like this, can those issues come to the forefront in building codes and how what we mandate? Does that happen today, and should it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we want our buildings to be well ventilated. We want them to be safe, but we also have to remember what the cost is involved in rehabbing old buildings. It's very expensive. So you need to balance a lot of factors. But the city of Chicago has an excellent, I think, HVAC and ventilation inspection program, permit review. We have dedicated people both on the review side and the inspection side to make sure that ventilation is properly addressed in all building permits. And if people come in with ideas of how they want to do it better or reduce costs, I mean, we're going to talk to you, because it's very challenging to keep these older buildings going, and you want to because you like the architecture. You don't want everything to be all brand new. You want to have that feeling, that vintage feeling that everybody loves. And so it's constantly, balancing many different factors. But it can be done. If you're dedicated and you want to do it, you can do it.
Carol Ross Barney, you are credited with really some of the great public space projects in this city. And what you've done for the city, I think, is really being recognized here. But in the course of doing that, when we think of something as great as the Riverwalk space, which you're a firm as leader in putting together, how do you, as she says, balance that need for great design, preservation, all those things with something that really is affecting our health and our lives?
Well, I think that what architects think about, what designers think about, is that balance. When you accomplish that balance, then you have a great design. It's much more integrated, and it's much more holistic than just, you look at a building and you say, it looks like this, it's beautiful. There's so much more to it. And I think what's really impressive to me, and I love having the building commissioner sitting next to me. I think she has such a hard job. I mean, basically the building code was developed to, it's sort of our our community idea of what's safe. And so it's always changing. For example, building codes on the East Coast, well, from Chicago on, are basically about fire. And so if you think about fire and clean air, the way that you make a building safe from fire is you make it so that if a fire occurs, you can take the air out. You can starve the fire. That makes for buildings that are tight and not ventilated. On the other hand, that's changed over the years. For example, if you ventilate a building, that's great. You can ventilate it, but then the air that you're replacing has to be heated or cooled. And therefore, a building that's super well ventilated will be an energy hog. So in every case, it's establishing this balance, which I think is part of the answer is research and finding that balance. But what good design does is it puts that in place. We did a project, years ago. Well, actually, the building's still there, Schurz High School. And I didn't design Schurz High School. I'm not that old. We renovated Schurz High School. Actually, the architect, yeah. And when it was built, Dwight Perkins was the architect. He's like the dean of Chicago architects in about the turn of the century. And when they built it, Chicago was so polluted from burning coal that they put the lunchroom on the top floor. And the stairwells, they wanted to get fresh air throughout the building, and the quickest way to do it is to build a shaft. So they left the stairwells all open, and they opened the classroom windows, and that's what would draw the air through the building. But over the years, because first of all, it's hard to get food up to
top floor.
Yeah, and because they wanted to fireproof it, all those features went away. And so you can see how the environment and this desire for a healthy building affects the design.
Yeah. I mean, while we're talking about ventilation and standards, I think most people would be surprised to know that one of the standards that governs ventilation and air quality indoors is actually called the Standard for Acceptable Indoor Air Quality. So
Acceptable.
That's acceptable. You picked up on it right away, right? Every indoor environment we're in, homes, offices, the coffee shop you were in this morning,
The room we're in now.
the room we're in right now is governed to this design standard. That's a bare minimum. It's set by ASHRAE. ASHRAE calls it a minimum standard. The problem is we keep designing to this standard for acceptable indoor air quality, despite the decades of evidence that show there are these benefits to increasing ventilation rates, and yet we're still trying to meet this minimum. We're designing for this minimum standard, and it's designed for energy conservation, right? We've so tightened up our building envelopes that we've decreased ventilation.
Which is important, though. I mean, it is an important priority, right? We want to encourage
If you reduce energy use, you reduce the hydrocarbon pollutants. So I mean, it's a big equation. It's not just a room.
I think it's a false choice we've been presented with for a long time, that it's energy or health, when in fact we have to have both, and we can have both with energy efficient technologies. So this false choice, well, you know, what's the health trade-off versus energy? It's a mistake when we think about the indoor environment. And these agencies that set these standards have been grappling with this for decades. But you know, health should be the primary motivator for determining what the standard should be for indoors.
Right, and you come from a legal background as well, so as you speak to organizations that are either renovating or building new structures, I mean, you have as she says, the tough job of saying, listen, it's not just about your money here, right?
Right, but it is and it isn't about the money, because if you make it so expensive that people don't do anything, then you're worse off as if you did nothing. So I think there's always that balance. Is it better than it was? Are we saving a building? Are we saving a neighborhood? And at what cost? Because if you make things so expensive, then people won't invest. So we have to try to find ways that we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish without, you know, breaking the bank. So money is always part of it, and you want to work with people. You want to make things better. You want to make it safe. But it is a constant balancing act, and all buildings are different. You know, you can approach, you know, the high school that was renovated. You could approach office buildings. It's all going to be different. You know, buildings are almost like people, I say, because I've been working with buildings either through the law department, you know, prosecuting building and housing court cases, or now as the building commissioner, and no two buildings are alike. They're like people, and they're individualistic, and you have to look at it, and you have to determine what's best for that building. And new buildings are like having kids. I mean, you don't know what that kid, you think you're going to raise this kid to be a certain way, and you think this building's going to be a certain way, and you get there and maybe the construction wasn't up to par,
Right.
or
Or maybe you learned something.
yeah, so it could be anything. So you just, I just don't always see a one-size-fits-all approach.
But I mean, you're looking at this is a city which it loves its architecture, and
Right.
it loves its architectural history, right? So as we try to consider what our past is and preserve that.
I think the future is, I think Joe's totally right. The default is health, and the corollary, the way you make it urban, is the corollary is livability. And so that should be where you measure the skid from. And then all the other pieces fall in place, indoor, outdoor. But I think really that's what we're learning, that's the big effect of different things. Like Joe mentioned VOCs. The stuff we put in buildings is probably by far the worst thing that can happen to you. I don't know, I didn't read about cooking. Is cooking worse than like concrete?
Turn your fan on. That's what I learned from Joe.
Yeah,
well, you can-
Turn your vent-a-hood on.
Really? My husband's always on my case about that, and he's
Turn your
always
vent
telling
up.
me, I'm like, nah, you don't need it.
Haven't talked to
No. He's right, as usual, right? Yeah, he'll tell me.
But building materials off-gas for years after they're put in place. So, I mean, there's a lot we need to know scientifically, and there's a lot of balancing we need to do.
Yeah, I think about the indoor environment, and sometimes I think of this three-pronged assault that it presents. And one is that outdoor air pollutants migrate indoors from automobiles and coal-fired power plants. The other is that we have these indoor sources. And EPA cites that we can be 3 to 5 times higher levels indoors than outdoors. And so we have outdoor sources that penetrate indoors. We have indoor sources, things that emit from these chairs and the carpeting, our personal care products, when we cook. And then the third one, I think, is people don't always think about it. If you're in a multi-family place, is what is your neighbor doing? So it turns out the air in your place comes a little bit from your neighbors. So certainly if you're next to a neighbor that smokes, you smell that. Or if they're cooking, you smell what they're cooking. It's telling you there are penetrations. And the estimates are that up to 5% on average is of the air in your apartment is from the neighbor, up to 30%. So it's outdoors penetrating indoor. It's what you put in your place, and it's also what's your neighbor. And if you're in a single family home, maybe your neighbor is your garage. And you think about, well, what's in your garage? And that penetrates indoors too. So you have these multi-level, this three-pronged assault happening on your indoor environment, and it allows for the concentration of indoor pollutants, and this is where we spend all of our time. So it's intuitive that the indoor environment has an outsized impact on our health, although it's very often ignored in conversations. We love to talk about outdoor air pollution,
Right.
But really it's the indoor environment is more critical for your health.
One of the articles I read referred to a school where there was a diesel unit on the roof of the building, and when they monitored the classroom space, they could see the spikes, and it was whenever the generator would
Sure.
go on and went in. And these are the things you don't recognize. If I don't smell it, it didn't happen, right?
That's right.
If I'm not coughing, it didn't happen.
Right.
So, and you refer to awareness for firms but not all firms are as focused on those responsibilities. I mean, do you need their help to,
absolutely.
to
Absolutely.
force the issue?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a hard question or a hard comment to make. I think in general, design firms are focused on that. There are very few that aren't focused on the holistic health of a building. And I think most architects believe that leads to the aesthetic solution and enjoyment. But we are regulated by government agencies. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think we have to know where our societal or corporate where we are, what we believe. And I think it's important for institutions like Harvard and Joe to inform people of the facts. But I really think it's important that we understand what creates livability, what creates health, because that's what gets in the codes. And we follow the codes. It's sort of basic. The one problem is codes do change slowly. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Commissioner would be able to tell you all kinds of things about that. Chicago's notorious for slow
Codes
changing codes.
There is some history here, Commissioner.
Right. Yes.
And so how do you grapple with that? Even if you have recognition, you have the evidence, you have cooperation from the architects, even if you know that, as you say, you do have another client in this, which is the companies funding such kinds of projects. How do you force the issue?
Well, you force the issue. I mean, like I said, we have a very aggressive inspection program. We have, excellent HVAC and ventilation inspectors. And if we
But should you have stronger standards?
Well, I think our standards are pretty strong here. I mean, we have a pretty good code. I mean, the technologies change. And that's what I think we need to talk about a little bit is the changing technologies and making sure that our codes reflect that. And if our codes don't, we issue internal memos that the commissioner has the authority to issue to say that certain new technologies are acceptable. For example, the smoke-fired pizzas, the oven-fired pizzas are very popular now. So there's new technology for ventilation for restaurants like that. And the restaurants that we've gotten complaints about, we go out there, we inspect them. They have been pretty cooperative in going out and purchasing this expensive equipment and putting it in there to be good neighbors because, we're congested too. So it's not unusual for us to get complaints about, different odors or smells or coming into a unit. So we're used to working with that. And if people are completely uncooperative, then we cite people and we put them either for hearings at the Department of Administrative Hearings or a circuit court, and then we aggressively prosecute.
But people understand it smells bad or it smells too much or whatever. It's those tiny particulates, for example, that might be something that Joe would tell you about. Mm-hmm. But then somehow that has to get translated to me as the restaurant owner.
Right, and so we do.
I'm going to invest in that too. I'm going to invest in those kinds of filters as well.
Sometimes you have to, it depends. And like I said, it's a balancing act, and sometimes they are going to have to spend the money, and you do have to drop the hammer and just say, you have to do it. Because of the complaints that we're getting. But this is a great place to do business, and they do business well here. People like to go out. I mean, this is a great city. We have a record number of permits issued the last couple of years, cranes up in the air. So there's a ton of development here, and people have to be good neighbors.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to diss the city entirely. Chicago has it's true. In fact, if I had to attribute it to anything, it would be unions are very slow to change construction technologies. But on the other hand, the city's pushed ahead with, for example, green roofs. And green roofs are important. They store stormwater. That's one of the main reasons to do it. They clean the air because they're plants. And they create a good insulation for roofs. And the city's a leader in that. So I have to apologize.
I'm fine.
But there are certain things, especially construction techniques and technologies that are really hard to change quickly.
Even if there is awareness and even if there is evidence. I want to encourage any questions from the audience if we have. Ooh, people are ready to go.
Hi, Chris Rollison from Drive to Trust. I'm kind of a hacker, and I hear first that particulates and pollutants concentrate indoors, and it's really complicated and very costly to deal with that. Why not educate the public about opening the friggin' windows whenever you can? Because yes, that brings in the air, but you get rid of the concentration.
Yeah, so great question. And I've been doing this sick building investigations for a long time. I used to be a consultant before I was a professor at Harvard doing forensic investigations. I've seen everything that can go wrong in buildings, from biological, radiological, physical hazards. Ventilation is really important. And I want to tell you about a resource we've created this year, talking about how to optimize indoor environments for health so we stop chasing these problems. And some of it's about ventilation and natural ventilation, but we released what we call the 9 Foundations of a Healthy Building. And it's available on my Healthy Buildings program at Harvard. And we talk about the science behind all of these foundational elements to health, including ventilation, as an effort to try and educate. Because we've gotten the comment over and over, talking to real estate leaders, that the science is great, but good journals are where good science go to die, right? And no one's going to read it. So we say, well, there's this many papers that say, here's what we should do. And they said, well, synthesize that. So we did, and we created these 2-page executive summaries for each of the 9 foundations, fully cited back to the literature. So if you want to go read the stacks, that's great. But otherwise, you can get the 2-pager. What is ventilation? Why does it matter for health? What does the evidence say for why higher ventilation rates lead to lower sick building syndrome, lower reductions in infectious disease transmission, reductions in absenteeism for workers. So all the evidence is there. We tried to get it, to your point, to educate, to get that science into something that's readable and decipherable and actionable.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, though, is really important. We did a building a few years ago at Governor State University. It was a faculty office building, and we gave every faculty member direct control of their windows, and they had a fan coil unit so that they could control the heating and cooling. The energy use went down dramatically. The building used far less energy than we thought it would, and the professors were quite happy because they could open their windows or make it hot and cold. I think one of the things that puzzles me, though, is that's easy temperature. You know, it used to be throw a log on the fire. Now you can do it from your iPhone. I think it's a harder, I think we need more recognition to what things are injurious when you talk about particulate that's making you unhealthy or not well. But I think that might be coming, too.
Hi, my name is Todd Fraley from Respiratory Health Association. So we know that housing is one of the greatest social determinants of health, and as Dr. Morita said, a lot of great work has been done about lead abatement, about mitigation of asthma triggers, mitigation of radon, but a lot of that work is reactionary. You know, an inspection isn't done until a child is poisoned with lead, until a child has been diagnosed with asthma. So what can prospectively be done to identify those problem areas, especially in a city like Chicago that has aging housing stock?
I'm happy to, or do you want to?
I think you all have an answer to this.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a really great question. And, you know, right, if you just mention all the problems, it's just complaining. So you want to be sure that if you mention the problems, there are solutions. And I think there are. A lot of this we can control through source control, better decisions about the products we put into our homes, low VOCs, no pesticide use, purchasing furniture without flame retardant chemicals, right? These are chemicals that migrate into the air and dust that we breathe and ingest. So we can make better decisions on the source side. And then there are some really prudent public health measures if you can't mitigate these exposures from source control, right? You can, basics, wash your hands, that's public health, to remove the dust loading. 2, leave your shoes off so you're not tracking in outdoor pollutants or dust into your home. And then you want to control the exposures and the particles and the chemicals in your environment where they are, in the air and the dust. If you look at you mentioned lead specifically. So the guidance on lead is to be sure that you're using vacuums with HEPA filtration, because very often people will use a vacuum that, if it doesn't capture the particles, you then disperse the particles into smaller particles, and you actually can increase the exposure. So we have to be thoughtful on all these approaches. So it's source, eliminating exposures, and then the last one's ventilation.
Right.
We talked
And can you just say that about kitchens? Because I think I must not be the only person that had not thought of this, but.
Sure. Well, you know, you think about a quarter of the U.S. uses natural gas stoves, right? And when you're cooking, you're generating particles and ultrafine particles. And a lot of times, look at the exhaust over your stove, right? A lot of times, just recirculating that air, and it's really not filtration happening there. It's capturing boulders. It's not really filtering the air. You want to have exhaust ventilation, so that you're capturing those pollutants and putting them outside and not just recirculating them, sometimes right back into your breathing zone. So that's something to look out for in your kitchen in particular.
See, population density. Last thought on that? We're running out of time. Just in terms of how we think about design in the future.
I think that I got distracted by the housing question. You know, in the earlier panel, someone said clean air is a right. I think that basic housing should also fall in that category, which I guess, I mean, that's obviously an answer from 30,000 feet, but I think deficient housing is a huge cause of inequality and lack of social justice in our city and in our country. So I think it's more than lead. I think it's really looking at what we provide for our community, for our society. Design is always changing. It has to be holistic, and if it's not, it won't be successful.
And it won't protect us either. Last thought from you about how a city protects its people.
Well, I think the city protects its people really by having a very strong commitment from the mayor on down that healthy housing is important, a good building department. I think that the city of Chicago has a lot of very livable neighborhoods, unlike a lot of other large cities, and we have a a lot of great places and neighborhoods to live in. And I think in part it's because for many years the city of Chicago's had an aggressive building department. We've been prosecuting cases in housing court since the late 50s, early 60s, where we've taken housing very seriously, and we have saved millions of units and kept them in play and kept people living in them. And it's so important to stay on top of it. You know, when you're fixing a building or repairing a building, that's money you don't see spent. So nobody wants to write that check. And so you have to kind of force it. And you do that by working with people, and if they don't respond, then you know, you have to prosecute the cases, but also with the hand of saying, you know, we're not here just to fine you or punish you, but we just want to make your building better for your people and our people. And that's kind of our philosophy.
And hopefully we will all be healthier as a result. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks.